The Hobie 16, the original beach cat and renowned for defining catamaran sailing. A large fleet of 50 boats gathered in the town of Mosselbay in the Western Cape. Nestled in a protected bay, an area that typically promises perfect sailing conditions, with good breeze and blue seas. Mosselbay Yacht Club played host to this year's Hobie 16 Nationals. One of South Africa's best supported classes, the Hobie 16 has broad appeal, represented by competitors nationwide from Cape Town to Gauteng. Sailing to the uninitiated has been likened to standing in the shower tearing up money, which begs the obvious question, why?
It's something that never gets boring, it never dulls your senses. Every single time you go out there, it's a new challenge. And I think it's a phenomenal sport because anybody can take part. You can have people as young as 11 years old out there competing against people that are 60-something years old. Women sailing against men, juniors sailing against seniors. You know, it's a physical workout, it's incredibly sociable, and it's a tactical sport as well as a physical sport. So you're constantly using your mind, you're constantly thinking of new tactics, what can I do differently? And then you've got like these outside influences, the weather and things like that keep throwing you curveballs. So you've got to be on your toes all the time, and it's a huge challenge.
Although the original Hobie 16 was designed in 1967, the one design class has remained popular, with over 100,000 boats produced worldwide. The day before the event started, last year's national champion held a clinic of sorts, giving pointers to the other sailors on improving their potential boat speed.
The whole Hobie class, over the generations, it's always been about sportsmanship, and we would never keep anything secret. If we found out we were doing something right and it was quicker, we'll try and pass it on to the rest of the fleet, and through that manner we've really grown a competitive fleet, and in the process I think there's probably at least 6 world champions in this event.
Registration of competitors involves making sure that both skipper and crew adhere to the minimum combined weight of 130 kilograms. Those crew who are on the lighter side are penalised with having to carry additional ballast. This measure ensures that the fleet remain more competitive and racing a tighter contest. The sailing courses are laid out within the confines of the bay. Boats start the race between the bridge boat and a start pin. After the start, the fleet tack upwind to round the windward mark. They reach downwind to the bottom of the course to pass between a gate before heading back upwind to the windward mark. An additional wing mark may be laid to spice things up, with powered reaches adding to the spectacle. Depending on the course set, several roundings are completed before the race ends between the bridge boat and finishing pin. Racing scheduled for Saturday was cancelled, with light winds prevailing throughout the day, but the weather forecast looked more promising for the days ahead. And come Sunday, a southwesterly had picked up, allowing the race officer to set a course. The time before a race begins is normally spent with skipper and crew assessing the conditions. Some of the many tasks before racing starts in earnest are determining which side of the start line is favoured and looking up the course to establish the pattern of the gusts. The South African Hobie 16 class has historically performed well, with no less than 5 world champions, including the likes of Sean Ferry and Blaine Dodds. As the countdown winds down, the boats jostle for position along the line. Staying behind the line is crucial, while maintaining enough space to keep clear air over your sails. Two boats on the far end were over the line and will have to restart or face a penalty. Steve and Erica Searle enjoying clean air, but it seems the pin end of the start line was slightly biased, which ensured Blaine and Roxanne Dodds were able to gain clear air and revel in the building breeze. Alan Lawrence, sailing with his son Daniel, were also early contenders. After rounding the windward mark, Andrew and Angela Ward head downwind, lifting one of their rudders to lessen the drag. Mark Koppel and crew tire and hammock all the way down from Gauteng, proving that inland sailors remain a competitive force. And slightly out of his normal position near the head of the fleet, defending champion William Edwards sailing with his wife Lucinda. Multinational and world champion Sean Ferry sailing with his niece, a complete newcomer to the sport, passing behind Andrew Ward, who on port tack has to give way. By the time the fleet had returned to the top windward mark, the Dodds pair were lying in second position. Tacking onto the starboard ley line to close to the leader Alan. Notice Roxanne backing the jib to help get the bow around. On the reach downwind, the pair were neck and neck, with Andrew Ward remaining in close contention. At the bottom end of the course, the fleet passed through a gate, choosing to round either one of two buoys. This not only separates the fleet, but creates more options and, in turn, adds to the competitive nature of sailing within a large fleet. Running up to the final rounding of the windward mark, the Dodds had pulled out a lead over the other contenders, double trapezing, epitomizing the appeal of fast multi-hull sailing. Earlier leader Alan Lawrence had slipped from first to fourth, a position he would maintain to the finish. After the Dodds had rounded the top mark, the Haywards had moved up several positions to close the gap, and this close jostling continued downwind to the finish. Race 2 started with the breeze building to 15 knots. Sean Ferry getting away cleanly at the pin end. Also away cleanly, Alan Lawrence, sail number 33, the white sail furthest from the camera. The Wards tacking across onto port, keeping clear of the boats on starboard. Once round the top mark, the fleet enjoyed good reaching conditions. Sailing the upwind leg for the second time, William was in top position ahead of Blaine. Ewald Erasmus crossing behind Blaine Dodds, going well in the heavier conditions. But there was no stopping Alan Lawrence, who favoured the left side of the course, rounding the windward mark ahead of Mark Koppel. Not far behind, William Edwards managed to eke ahead of Sean Ferry, sailing above him, spoiling Sean's rounding by giving him dirty air. Junior world champion Matt Whitehead keeping track of the leaders.
So much experience and knowledge from their side that I still need to learn, and over the years I'm hoping that they'll be able to pass it down to me and I could try and carry on the Hobie way of life.
Another junior sailor arriving at the windward mark in the top 10 and doing it in style was Simon Benarius. But there was no stopping Alan and Daniel Lawrence as they sailed on to win, relatively unopposed. Followed not long after by William and Lucinda Edwards in second and Blaine Dodds in third. Fourth and fifth equally close, Mark Koppel edging ahead of Belinda Hayward. By race 3, the wind had eased slightly and shifted to the south. This is typical to coastal environments and occurs when the hot air onshore rises and the cool air over the sea flows toward it. Not long after the start, the fleet was already well spread across the bay, but by the downwind leg, a pattern was emerging with the families Dodds, Edwards, Lawrence and Ward racing towards the bottom gate, followed by the top juniors, Ewald Erasmus, sailing with another of the Dodds family, Pete. By the second rounding of the weather mark, the Dodds were followed by the Edwards. Not far behind, the Wards, and then the Lawrences. These positions would remain unchanged to the finish. The remainder of the fleet were also having their fair share of individual battles. Robert Fine with the blue and white sails being passed on the inside by Mike Goodyear, sailing with his daughter Stephanie. And then just when you push a little too hard, Dane and Francis Levenderis pitch poling in fairly spectacular fashion. But the leaders were literally flying, a hole, that is, one of the major attractions to sailing a catamaran, and a skill honed after years of practice.
You try to cover the most important guy behind you. Unfortunately, William Edwards and Alan Lawrence are both very close to us at the moment. In fact, Alan was doing very well. He was actually in the lead until the last race. So it's difficult who to cover. You just do your best and you hope you don't make a mistake there.
The finishing positions among the top 4 boats was an incredibly close affair, with Edwards tacking just before the bridge boat, which slowed his progress. This allowed Andrew Ward to close right up. Ward in turn clears the line just ahead of Alan Lawrence, who dips behind on port tack, a separation of just 3 seconds. After a quick lunch ashore, the fleet returned for the last race of the day, which started in a breeze that was slowly fading. This turned out to be one of the trickier races for the competitors, having to contend not only with a dying breeze, but fluky conditions as well. Up the first windward leg, the leaders were all in close proximity, the sailors shifting their weight well forward, lifting the stern to lessen the drag. When sailing in light conditions, it's important to maintain momentum, so all movements on the boat are a little more measured, as seen with Andrew Young and Pippi Edwards tacking their boat around the weather mark. By the bottom mark, the wind was shifting to the west and would dramatically influence the results. At this stage, William Edwards was in first place, followed by the Dodds and the Lawrences, Sean Ferry lying in fourth. Alan Lawrence's decision to tack to the right side of the course was the big decider, and he pulled out a massive lead. William Edwards tacked across to cover him, a decision which proved to be the right one. Rob Handley and Eric Norton up amongst the leaders in fifth place. By the time the Dodds reached the weather mark for their second rounding, they were well out of the top 10 placings and desperately in need of a small miracle to recover. But there was no catching Alan and Daniel Lawrence.
We were lying third going down to the last bottom mark, and we split with William and Blaine, and then we got some wind on this side, they had no wind on that side, and we pulled through.
William and Lucinda seemingly making a habit of finishing second.
Halfway through the race, the westerly then prevailed, so it was very difficult to try and read which way it was going to go, but the best thing was just to try and cover the fleet and just keep moving, you know, and just make sure you don't fall in any holes. So, yeah, it was a very taxing race, I must admit.
Andrew Young and Pippi Edwards finished third, their best position so far, followed a little later by the juniors Erasmus and Dodds in sixth, and then a great recovery by the other Dodds family members in seventh.
It was frustrating when you were lying second, and then I suppose that's what happens in the light stuff. There's not much you can do.
We actually just overstood the weather mark a little bit and came footing in there, but even that didn't work. We fell in the hole as well. So there's a whole lot of negatives, but we did come back at the end. That's the main thing.
The leading juniors were doing incredibly well, with an overall seventh after the day's racing.
Started off very light, stayed very light most of the race, and we had quite a couple of mishaps where people overtook us, but then we managed to get the position back in the end.
But yeah, we're hoping to be in the top 10. See what happens.
But yeah, we're not counting our eggs before they hatch. We're just really just here to have fun.
Yeah.
And hopefully we do well.
Fourth in the last race meant Sean Ferry was remaining the proverbial dark horse.
I'm up nibbling with the front pack. Haven't got the edge, which I normally have. Obviously, we came through a whole learning mode.
Yeah, he was swearing a lot, but I guess it's just part of sailing. So
It's more about getting the juniors going now than anything else.
At the end of the day, a large part of the fleet had not finished the last race in the allocated time limit, creating a bit of a shake-up in the results. However, it was notable that 3 junior teams were placed 7th, 9th and 10th. Getting a boat prepared for a regatta requires more than just turning up for the event.
We started out on an old second-hand boat. It required a lot of work. We approached a company, MIP, who's in the software development side of things. They thought it would be a nice, unique idea to get involved with a green sport. They gave us a new set of sails. They helped us kit our boat out, get us ready for the nationals. It's a green sport. It's obviously something that the larger companies would like to be involved in, and it's good PR.
Overcast conditions greeted the sailors on the Monday morning of the 25th. The teams would require all their energy with a fresh breeze forecast. Race 5 had a fairly chaotic start with a severe pin bias. Many of the fleet could not make the line on starboard and had to tack to port, resulting in a little carnage. Robert Fine and Miles Bissett remaining incredibly calm, considering someone had crashed into their boat. By the top mark, the juniors were leading the way. Simon Benarius and crew Charlie Hammock closely followed by the Dodds duo. No surprises with Alan Lawrence up amongst the leading pack. But what was strange was that William Edwards was notably missing from the following fleet, having not had a good start. Another mishap in this race was Simon Russell, sailing with his son Alex. At minimum weight, they were struggling to right their capsized boat. But help was on hand. Rob Holden running the rescue craft, lifting their mast clear of the water. Job done. This meant we missed the finish, with Andrew Ward coming in ahead of Alan Lawrence. With the line reset square to the wind, race 6 had the fleet starting on a real flyer. With the wind varying between 15 and 18 knots, conditions were proving perfect. Once again, Blaine and Roxanne Dodds were dominating at the head of the fleet, and they maintained that position, rounding the weather mark ahead of Alan Lawrence. Again, William Edwards was missing from the top order. Surely this would impact badly on his overall positioning. At the bottom mark, the status quo remained unchanged, with the Lawrence family trailing the Dodds, but the gap was as narrow as ever. The Edwards boat was spotted way down the ranks near the back of the fleet, confirming his dismal position. By the second rounding of the wing mark, which was added for this day of racing, Alan Lawrence had passed Blaine Dodds, and surprisingly, William Edwards was seen in the background, well up from where he was last positioned. This was proving to be the comeback of the regatta. We track Alan and Daniel as they round the bottom mark for the final time, heading up to the finish. Their first position secured. Amazingly, William Edwards had clawed his way up to second place.
It's one of the best races that I've ever had, you know, to have that type of a comeback. It doesn't always happen like that, because generally, you know, you might make up a couple of positions, but never 30-odd positions. It's very unusual, but I think there was a fair amount of luck in that too. So it was an amazing feeling to cross second after all that.
Wind conditions remained unchanged for the start of race 7, and the entire fleet were making quick progress across the bay. Alan Lawrence was again leading the fleet and beginning to dominate proceedings. At this rate, Dodds and Edwards would have to pull out all the stops in the upcoming races. Juniors Benarius and Hammock maintaining their position in the top 10. By round 2, Blaine powering down over William to pip him at the weather mark. However, the Lawrences were as dominant as ever, never once relinquishing their lead, which meant Dodds and Edwards were left to fight over second and third placings. Later that afternoon, with the wind switching south, race 8 had most of the fleet over the line prematurely. General recall.
Depending where it's favoured, that's where there's a lot of congestion, and you know, sometimes people are over early and they get an individual recall, but sometimes if the whole fleet, they can't identify how many boats are over the line, then they have to do a general recall, which means the start is rerun again.
And second time around, all the boats managed to start without any infringements. Robert and Miles showing good form in the tricky conditions. On this occasion, the fleet followed a similar route, getting onto the starboard ley line quite early. At the top mark, Colin Whitehead was in the lead, sailing with his daughter Kelly. The Edwards in hot pursuit, followed by young Matt Whitehead, making race 8 a real family affair. The Lawrence family in fourth. By the second rounding, William and Lucinda Edwards were pulling out all the stops. We stay with them as they power up to the windward mark. Executing a perfect rounding with a controlled jibe. Clearly no pressure with the cameras in close proximity. No real surprise with Alan and Daniel moving up 2 places. The Edwards went on to claim their first win in this regatta, just reward after a series of second places. Again, we witnessed a very close finish for the remaining competitors. Lawrence second, Whitehead coming in on starboard and having the right of way. Dodds dips below his stern and powers up to the line to take third. And young Whitehead remaining in contention with a credible 6th. Race 9 and another general recall. But the I flag ensuring the second attempt went according to plan. Excellent starts from Edwards and Lawrence, as well as Matt Whitehead. By the top mark, the Williams boat was leading, but the breeze was fading quickly. Clearly evident by the time the rest of the fleet rounded. Andrew and Angela Ward read the tricky conditions perfectly and took their second win of the regatta. The Edwards boat had slipped to 4th, with Dodds and Hayward 2nd and 3rd respectively. But it was a close affair. As the sun set, Lawrence crossed in 5th. The following day, which was to be the final day of scheduled racing, dawned to gale force winds, and even the protected bay could not offer the sailors the opportunity of further races, which meant the national championship was decided, the Lawrence team in top position.
It was quite tricky sailing over the days that we did race, and I think we sailed consistently and we had higher positions than Blaine ended up 2nd. We had 1st and 2nds and he was 2nds and 3rds. It was always tight, but I think in the rookie stuff, in the switchy stuff, we sailed slightly better than him.
The top 3 positions remained unchanged, but with 3 junior teams in the top 10 placings, the future of the Hobie class looks promising.